Saint Nocturne University. Book 3. Chapter 5. The child's voice did not echo. That made it worse. Echoes belong to rooms. To distance. To normal sound behaving normally. This voice came from the heart chamber like it had been waiting under everyone's words, small and patient, tucked beneath contracts, bloodlines, records, seals, and adults who kept calling children liabilities after losing track of what a child sounded like. Now can I come out? The lantern heart pulsed once. Soft. Gold. Then red. Then gold again. Professor Graves heard it first because she had not left the chapel after the council hearing. She stood at the edge of the heart chamber with two student witnesses, a staff observer, and a root circle containment reader, reviewing stabilization levels and pretending that paperwork could make her less afraid. The containment reader dropped her clipboard. One of the student witnesses whispered, "Please tell me that was the building." Professor Graves did not answer. The lantern heart hung above the round table, no larger than it had been at midnight, but something had changed inside it. The light that had once held Dean Nightingale's fading shape now turned cloudy, as if breath had fogged glass from within. The voice came again. "Hello. Younger this time. Or maybe just closer." The staff observer, a groundskeeper named Mr. Harlan, took one step back. "Nope." Professor Graves lifted her cane. "Identify yourself." The lantern heart brightened. A shadow moved inside. Small hands pressed against the inner surface of the light. "I don't know if I'm supposed to say." The student witness started crying immediately. Professor Graves' throat tightened. She had spent decades training herself to hear danger before pity. It had saved her life. It had also ruined parts of her she did not know how to retrieve. This voice found one of those parts and knocked. "Are you trapped?" she asked. The answer came after a pause. "I think everybody is." That was when the heart chamber alert went out. Not to everyone. The new system did what it had been built to do. It routed the alert to collective oversight first: student emergency council, staff operations, archive consent, heart chamber stabilization, community witnesses, and named affected lines. Which meant 23 phones buzzed at once across campus. Zora Baptiste was halfway to lunch with Aya, Nadine, Maxine, and Talia when her phone lit. Heart chamber status update. Unidentified bound presence detected. Voice classification, child/unknown age/unknown era. Response required, claimant identification protocol. Zora stopped walking. I read her own phone beside her. All the color left her face. Nadine looked between them. "What is it?" Maxine closed her eyes before anyone answered. Because old women with old guilt knew when history had found another mouth. Talia leaned over Zora's screen. "Oh, absolutely not," she said. "No more surprise children." Zora looked at Aya. Aya's expression had gone distant, old training flickering behind her eyes. Zora hated that look. "Do you know?" Zora asked. Aya shook her head. Then stopped. "I might." Nadine's voice cracked. "Aya." Aya stared toward the chapel. "There were other files," she said. "Under Aurelia Crown. Not active. Restricted. I saw references to failed child vessels." Zora's stomach turned. Talia's face hardened. "I need everybody to stop saying children and vessels in the same sentence." Maxine whispered, "Mabel said there was more than one child planned." Nadine gripped the strap of her bag. Zora looked at her mother. You knew. Nadine shook her head quickly, tears already forming. No. Baby, no. Not that. Aya looked like she wanted to believe her. Zora looked like she wanted not to have to decide. The chapel bell rang once. Not loud. A request. That almost made Zora angrier. Across the quad, people started looking up as their friends on oversight teams reacted. No public blast. No aftershade post. No gossip page. Just visible concern spreading through human faces the old-fashioned way. That felt more intimate. More dangerous. Lila Freeman arrived at the chapel steps with Dre Coleman, both moving fast. She had no recorder in her hand. Dre had a clipboard. Of course. Kiki Bell came with Imani, Taj, and Rome, because Howl House alerts had routed to Imani and Rome's first moon file had apparently placed him under child record sensitivity witness, which made his mother start texting in all caps. Brielle, Nia, and Juno arrived from the Vale-born studio. Malik and Serafina arrived from Blood Contract Review with Celia behind them. Seven and Delphine came from Graves Hall still arguing. It said child classification, Seven said. And therefore you ran without finishing the ward note, Delphine snapped. A child is in the heart chamber. A childlike voice is in the heart chamber. Precision matters. Your heart is a footnote. Your panic is a liability. Micah Reed followed behind them eating chips. They were holding hands on the stairs. Both shouted, no. They had absolutely been holding hands on the stairs. Nobody had time to process that. The chapel doors stood open. That was already wrong. Professor Graves waited at the threshold, face carved into careful severity. Zora reached the steps first. What is it? Graves looked at the gathered group. We do not know. Lila said, is it Dean Nightingale? No. Camille? No. Trap? Professor Graves hesitated. Dre muttered, that's Professor for yes but complicated. Graves looked at him. He did not apologize. She turned back to the group. It may be a bound record with consciousness. It may be a preserved memory. It may be a surviving spirit. It may be a lure shaped like a child because the heart has learned what we protect. Nia's face tightened. Brielle whispered, that is evil. Mama Odessa arrived behind them, cane clicking. Or it is a child and all of you are delaying because adults love fearing manipulation more than risking tenderness. No one had a good answer to that. Marva Cross stood beside her. Both possibilities can sit in the same room. Ms. Renee pushed through the crowd with a thermos in one hand. Then we go in with witnesses and no one touches glowing mystery children without consent, containment, and snacks. Kiki looked at her. Snacks. Ms. Renee stared back. Children get hungry. Kiki nodded solemnly. Correct. The group descended into the chapel. This time, the heart chamber did not rearrange itself dramatically. No red flood. No forced table. No screaming walls. Just the round chamber, the embedded objects now loosened and labeled for restoration, the circular table, and the lantern heart suspended above it. Inside the lantern, the small shadow turned toward them. A child-shaped outline. Not fully visible. Not fully hidden. Zora stopped at the edge of the table. Aya stood beside her. Nasir came to her other side. The shadow lifted one hand. Hi. Nobody spoke. Then Rome, voice small but steady, said, hi. The shadow seemed to brighten. You can hear me. Rome nodded, then looked terrified that he had become spokesperson. Kiki put one hand on his shoulder. He can. We can. The child turned inside the light. Is Lucien gone? Every adult in the chamber went still. Professor Graves said carefully, Dean Nightingale is contained. The child paused. That means no. Zora exhaled through her nose. She already liked the kid, which made her suspicious of herself. Aya stepped forward. What is your name? The child's outline flickered. I had 3. The chamber chilled. Nadine covered her mouth. Maxine whispered a prayer. Aya's face went hard in the way it did when blood court training met Baptiste rage. Who gave them to you? She asked. The first one was mine, the child said. I think. The second was for the file. The third was for the room. Dre wrote that down, then stopped and looked at the lantern. Is it okay if I write what you say? The child turned toward him. Why? Dre lowered the clipboard slightly. So people don't change it later. The child seemed to consider. Okay. But not everything. Dre nodded immediately. You say stop, I stop. The lantern glowed gold. Okay. Lila looked at Dre with something soft in her face. He ignored it professionally. Zora leaned closer, careful not to touch the table. What should we call you right now? Another pause. Not file name. Okay. Not room name. Okay. The shadow flickered again. Maybe solution. Nadine inhaled sharply. Maxine looked at her. What? Zora asked. Nadine's face had gone pale. My mother, she whispered. She had a baby brother named Solomon. He disappeared from family records before I was born. I thought it was one of those stories people tell when records get messy. The lantern pulsed. The child whispered, Solomon was old name. Zora felt the floor tilt. I reached for the edge of the table. Nasir stared at the lantern. Maxine looked like she might be sick. Professor Graves stepped closer. Soul, do you know how long you have been in the heart chamber? The light dimmed. I stopped counting after the chapel learned my breathing. Brielle made a small sound. Nia closed her eyes. Juno looked away. Talia, who had insisted on coming down and stood near the stairs with her bat, said, I'm going to need permission to be angry. Mama Odessa said, granted. Talia nodded. Thank you. Seven's voice was quiet. He predates Aya and Nasir. Delphine looked at the lantern. A prior bridge attempt. Professor Graves did not deny it. The lantern brightened with fear. Am I in trouble? Every young person in the chamber reacted before the adults did. No, Rome said. No, Nia said. No, Zora said, too sharply. The child shadow retreated slightly inside the lantern anyway. Ms. Renee set the thermos on the table. What does he need? The heart chamber answered before anyone else. A message appeared across the stone wall. Bound presence, Soul/Solomon Baptiste. Status, partial child record / partial spirit / partial heart anchor. Release risk, high. Containment risk, high. Claimant identification required. Zora hated every word. Partial child, she said. Professor Graves looked devastated. The heart chamber may have preserved him as both record and anchor. Maxine stepped forward. In English. Aya answered, voice flat. They made a child into a living file. Then the file kept living after the child couldn't. Silence. Not even Kiki spoke. The lantern pulsed faintly. I don't think I'm all the way dead, Sol said. Nadine began to cry. Not loudly. Softly, like her body had found grief older than her own memory. Zora turned toward the chamber wall. What does claimant identification mean? The system displayed. Potential claimants. Baptiste line. Heart chamber oversight. Unknown descendant/community claim. Self-claim limited by bound status. Self-claim limited. Nia said, voice icy. The wall flickered. Bound presence cannot fully consent until status determined. Brielle crossed her arms. That sounds like the old system trying to sneak back in with legal breath. Serafina nodded. It is structurally dangerous. Malik looked at the lantern. Can we stabilize self-claim? Professor Graves turned to him, surprised. He shrugged. Blood contracts treat bound people as limited parties all the time. That's how families steal consent. If we can challenge the limitation, maybe Sol gets standing. Celia looked at her son. Then at the lantern. He is right. Malik blinked. Serafina whispered, rare. Celia ignored both of them. Standing first, she said. Before family claim. Before chamber claim. If Sol can express preference, even partially, that preference must lead. Nia nodded. Yes. Aya looked at Zora. Zora looked back. Baptiste line had appeared first. That felt like a trap too. Nadine stepped forward, shaking. I will not claim him like property. The lantern brightened. Nadine continued, voice trembling. But if he is our family, I will witness him. Maxine wiped her face. I will too. Zora swallowed. The child in the lantern pressed closer. Are you Baptistes? Zora laughed once, wet and bitter. Unfortunately. Sol's light flickered, almost like amusement. Aya stepped forward. I am Aya. I know. Aya froze. Zora turned. You know her. Sol's outline shifted. You cried under the table. Aya's face crumpled. Nasir whispered, you were there. I was already in the walls, Sol said. I tried to make the candle light. Aya covered her mouth. Zora stared at her sister, then the lantern. The candle from the memory. Sol nodded. I wanted you not to be scared. Aya sat down hard in one of the chairs. Nasir put a hand on her shoulder. She gripped it. Zora did not feel jealous this time. She felt rage. Cleaner. Older. Not at Aya. Not at Nasir. Not even at Maxine. At every adult who had found a child's fear useful enough to preserve. Professor Graves looked at Solution. Do you know who bound you? The lantern went red at the edges. Sol whispered, the founders started. Lucien continued. Others came and went. They fed me names when the heart got hungry. Fed you names? Seven asked. I held them so the school didn't crack. Dre stopped writing. The room understood together. Before the city anchors. Before Aya. Before Nasir. Before all of them. There had been Sol. The first child bridge. The first soft door. The first secret stomach of Saint Nocturne. The lantern dimmed. I'm tired. Ms. Renee opened the thermos, poured something into the lid, then paused because giving soup to a lantern was not straightforward. What does he eat? She demanded. The chamber wall answered. Bound presence sustains through claimed history/witness/restoration energy. Ms. Renee glared at the wall. That is not food. Kiki whispered, Ms. Renee beefing with metaphysics. Nia looked at the lantern. Witness, not spectacle. Brielle nodded. Small room. Lila closed her notebook. No publication. Dre looked at solution. Do you want everyone here? Soul's outline shrank slightly. No. Good. Painful, but good. The collective oversight system displayed. Presence selection required. Zora looked around. Soul chooses. The wall flickered like it was considering objecting. Then. Accepted. Soul's small shadow turned. You, he said, pointing toward Nadine. Nadine pressed a hand to her chest. You, he said to Maxine. You, to Zora. You, to Aya. Then Nasir. Then Nia. Everyone noticed that. Nia looked startled. Me. You said no like you meant it? Nia's eyes filled. Then Soul pointed to Dre. He writes when asked. Dre swallowed. Okay. Then Soul pointed to Ms. Renee. She brought food. Ms. Renee nodded, deeply serious. Correct. The lantern turned toward Professor Graves. It hesitated. The whole room held still. Soul said, not yet. Professor Graves bowed her head. Understood. That mattered. The others left. Not easily. Brielle looked at Nia like leaving her was difficult and staying unasked would be worse. Nia nodded once. Brielle left. Seven touched Zora's shoulder lightly, then left with Delphine and Micah. Talia pointed her bat at the lantern. I'm upstairs if the room acts weird. Soul's light flickered. Okay. Talia left satisfied. The chamber quieted with only those chosen. Nadine, Maxine, Zora, Aya, Nasir, Nia, Dre, Ms. Renee. And Soul in the lantern heart. For a moment, nobody knew how to begin. Then Ms. Renee poured soup into the thermos lid and set it near the lantern. Can you smell? Soul leaned close. The lantern glowed warm. Yes. It's squash, she said. Emotionally neutral. Soul giggled. The sound cracked something open in the room. Not repair. Not yet. But air. Dre wrote down. Soul laughed at soup. Then looked up. Is that okay? Soul nodded. Zora sat across from the lantern. Soul, do you want out? The lantern dimmed. Yes. A pause. I'm scared. Aya whispered, of what? What if I'm not a kid anymore? No one answered quickly. Nia moved closer. I lost memories, she said. When they came back, I thought I had to become whoever I would have been if they were never taken. Soul's light turned toward her. Nia continued. But I'm still becoming. You can be too. Soul was quiet. Then, softly, did it hurt? Nia did not lie. Yes. The lantern dimmed again. But not as much as never getting a choice, Nia said. Soul's light steadied. Zora looked at her with quiet gratitude. Nia did not need to see it. Maxine reached into her coat and pulled out a small red candle. My mother used candles to speak to old rooms, she said. Soul whispered, Mabel. Maxine almost dropped the candle. Zora leaned forward. You know Mabel. she yelled at the walls. Zora almost smiled through her anger. That sounds like her. Nadine wiped her cheeks. Can Mabel speak to him? Maxine looked at the candle. I don't know. Ask, Zora said. Maxine lit the red candle. The flame rose tall. Then bent toward the lantern. The chamber air changed. Warmth. Clove. Smoke. Dirt after rain. Mabel Baptiste's voice entered like she had been waiting outside the door with her ear pressed against it. Solomon. The lantern flashed gold so bright everyone shielded their eyes. Mabel. Maxine sobbed once. Nadine covered her mouth. Zora's eyes burned. Mabel's form appeared slowly beside the table, less solid than before, like the heart chamber made even ancestors pay a toll. She looked at the lantern. Every sharp line in her face broke. Oh, baby. Soul's voice trembled. You came back. Mabel's eyes filled with ancestral fury and grief. I never stopped trying to find which wall they put you in. The lantern shook. Zora grabbed the edge of the table. Aya whispered, he's destabilizing. Nia spoke gently. Soul, breathe if you can. I don't have. Then pretend, Nia said. Sometimes pretending gives your body instructions. The lantern pulsed slowly. Once. Twice. Gold steadied. Mabel looked at Nadine, then Zora, then Aya. So now you know why Baptiste women don't trust institutions with basements. Zora let out a broken laugh. Nadine whispered, he was real. Mabel turned to her granddaughter. Yes. My mother knew. Mabel's face hardened with old sorrow. Pieces. Every generation got pieces. Enough to fear. Not enough to free. Maxine wiped her face roughly. That ends, she said. Mabel looked at Soul. It better. Dre lifted his pen. Soul, do you want Mabel included as a witness? Yes, Soul said immediately. The system wall updated. Ancestral witness accepted. Then another line appeared. Self-claim strengthening. Celia, outside the chamber, would later call that legally fascinating. Ms. Renee would call it common sense finally learning manners. Inside the chamber, Soul pressed both hands against the lantern. I want my old name back. Mabel stepped closer. Say it. The lantern flickered. Solomon Baptiste. The heart chamber shook. Not violently. Like a person exhaling after holding breath too long. Embedded objects along the walls shifted. A small wooden toy horse slid free from the stone and landed gently on the table. Its paint was faded. One leg was cracked. Soul gasped. My horse. Nadine began crying again. Dre asked softly, can I write that? Soul said, yes. Dre wrote. Solomon Baptiste claimed old name. Toy horse returned. The system wall updated. Self-claim established, partial. Zora stared at the word partial. No. Aya looked at her. Zora stood. No. He said his name. You heard him. Mabel witnessed. Nadine witnessed. Maxine witnessed. We all did. The wall flickered. Bound status remains complex. Zora stepped toward it. Everything at the school remains complex. Stop using that to deny people. The lantern glowed brighter. Nia stood too. Self-claim is not partial because harm made him complicated. I rose. Bridge line corruption does not reduce personhood. Nasir stood. No more infrastructure. Nadine stood. No more forms deciding how much child is left. Maxine lifted the red candle. Mabel's ghost smiled like someone was finally speaking her language. The wall flashed. Recalculating. A pause. Then. Self-claim established. The lantern cracked. Not broke. Cracked. A thin line of gold light split down one side. Soul gasped. Dre stepped back. Ms. Renee lifted the soup like it might be needed. The crack widened. A small hand emerged from the lantern. Not shadow. Not fully flesh. Brown skin. Gold light threaded beneath it like veins of sunrise. Nadine made a sound that was almost prayer. Soul's hand reached blindly. Zora looked at Aya. Aya looked at Nadine. Nadine nodded through tears. Zora reached first. Her fingers closed gently around Soul's hand. It was warm. Too warm. Alive in a way that did not know what century it belonged to. Aya placed her hand over Zora's. Nasir added his. Nia did not touch, but stood witness. Maxine held the candle. Mabel spoke low. Come on, Solomon Baptiste. The room had you long enough. The lantern split open. Gold light flooded the chamber. When it faded, a child sat on the table. Maybe 8 years old. Maybe older. Maybe preserved at the age the heart had learned him best. He wore old-fashioned clothes that flickered at the edges, suspenders, a white shirt, trousers too short at the ankles, bare feet. His hair was close-cropped. His eyes were dark and wide and older than the rest of him. He held the broken toy horse in both hands. The lantern heart still floated above the table, smaller now, dimmer, stable but changed. Soul looked down at himself. Then at the room. Then at Ms. Renee. Can I have soup? Ms. Renee burst into tears and handed him the thermos lid. Upstairs, the chapel bell rang once. Clear. The system alert went out campus-wide. Bound child presence released from heart chamber. Name claimed, Solomon Baptiste. Status, protected person/temporal spiritual restoration required. Heart chamber stable, 94%. Lantern heart remains active. The quad erupted before anyone knew whether to cheer or panic. Talia read the alert outside the chapel and immediately said, I said no more surprise children. Kiki gasped. He's a Baptiste. Talia nodded solemnly. That explains the basement. Brielle looked toward the chapel doors with wet eyes. Nia was still inside, so Brielle stayed outside. That was getting easier. Not easy. Easier. 7 read the alert and sat down on the chapel steps. Delphine stood beside him. Are you faint? No. You look faint. I am processing a century-old child anchor becoming legally recognized. That is not a reason to sit on dirty stone. It is today. Malik looked at the alert, then at Celia. Protected person means council will try to claim jurisdiction. Celia's face hardened. Not if we file first. Serafina already had her phone out. Emergency guardianship structure. Multi-claimant. Baptiste line, community witness, student oversight, child advocate. Malik stared at her. She looked up. What? You're incredible under pressure. Do not make it romantic while I'm preventing child custody theft. He nodded. Right. Sorry. Inside the chamber, Sol drank squash soup from the thermos lid and made a face. Ms. Renee gasped. What? It's weird. It's emotionally neutral. I don't like neutral. Zora wiped her face and laughed. Mabel looked at him with devastating tenderness. You never did. Aya sat beside Nadine, both of them crying quietly now, not from one thing but too many. Nasir leaned against the table, watching Sol like he was seeing the first draft of what had happened to him. Nia stood near the stairs. Zora looked at her. Thank you. Nia nodded. I'm going up. You okay? No. Good answer. Nia almost smiled. Then left. Brielle waited outside the chapel, not touching her phone, not asking, not pushing. When Nia emerged, Brielle stood. Nia looked exhausted. Brielle asked, do you want space or company? Nia looked at her for a long moment. Company. Quiet. Brielle nodded. They sat on the chapel steps together. Quiet. For once, Brielle let silence do the work. Down in the heart chamber, Sol placed the empty thermos lid down and looked at Zora. Are you my family? Zora's throat closed. Mabel answered before Zora had to. Yes. Sol looked at Aya. And you? Aya wiped her face. Yes. He looked at Nadine. Nadine nodded, unable to speak. Maxine said, all of us, baby. Sol looked down at his toy horse. Then at the smaller lantern heart floating above the table. Is Lucienne still in there? The chamber cooled. Professor Graves had been waiting at the lower stair, not entering because Sol had not asked for her. Now every eye moved to the lantern. Inside, something shifted. A dark shape. Faint. Watching. Sol's small hand tightened around the horse. He doesn't like that I left. The lantern flickered red. Just once. Then gold again. The system wall updated. Heart chamber stable, 92%. Zora stood slowly. Oh, he is not about to haunt a child after losing custody. Mabel's eyes flashed. Say that. Professor Graves stepped down one stair. Solomon, she said gently. May I enter? Sol looked at Mabel. Mabel nodded once. Sol looked at Zora. Zora said, your call. The boy considered. Then said, yes. But not close. Professor Graves entered and stopped exactly where he indicated. Good. She looked at him with grief thick in her eyes. I am sorry. Sol tilted his head. For what? The question landed like a blade. Professor Graves closed her eyes. For not knowing how far back the harm went. For helping preserve a system that kept you bound. For every time I chose quiet action when loud truth might have found you sooner. Sol considered. Then said, okay. Professor Graves opened her eyes. Not forgiveness. A child acknowledging words and returning to soup. Exactly as much as she was owed. Zora almost smiled. Then the lantern heart pulsed again. A voice slid out. Dean Nightingale's. Weak. Furious. Touching. Sol flinched. Every adult moved. Zora stepped between Sol and the lantern before thinking. Aya moved with her. Nasir too. Maxine lifted the candle. Mabel's ghost grew brighter. Professor Graves raised her cane. Dean Nightingale's shape appeared faintly inside the lantern heart, diminished but not gone. His voice curled through the chamber. You free one child and call it justice. The heart is still active. The university still stands. The council still circles. Families still lie. Students still hunger for scandal. You have not ended anything. Zora stared at the lantern. No, she said. But we ended your access to him. The lantern flickered. Nightingale's eyes found Sol. Sol held the toy horse tighter. Nadine stood, shaking. Don't look at him. Lucien's expression shifted. Something like amusement. Something like contempt. Then Aya stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. You filed me. Lucien looked at her. You monitored Nasir. Nasir moved beside her. You buried Solomon. Zora stepped closer. You tried to recruit me. Maxine lifted the candle higher. You stole from my family. Professor Graves' voice was low. And I helped you last too long. Mabel's ghost pointed at the lantern. You done. The lantern heart flashed. Lucien's face warped. For one moment, the old dean's calm cracked completely. This school will devour itself without me. Sol's small voice answered before anyone else could. Then maybe it was hungry because you kept feeding it wrong. The chamber went silent. Nightingale stared. Then the lantern heart snapped shut around him. Not gone. Contained deeper. The system wall updated. Nightingale echo restricted. Access to protected person, denied. Heart chamber stable, 97%. Sol looked at the wall. Protected person is me. Dre nodded. Yes. Sol thought about that. Can protected person get better soup? Ms. Renee wiped her face. Protected person can get whatever he wants from my kitchen. Zora looked at her. Don't spoil the century-old heart, child. Ms. Renee glared. Try and stop me. Sol smiled. Small. Real. The heart chamber warmed. Later, when they brought Solomon upstairs, the quad went quiet. Not because someone ordered it. Because even Saint Nocturne understood when not to clap. Sol stood in the chapel doorway holding Zora's hand on one side and Nadine's on the other. Aya stayed close. Maxine held the red candle. Nasir walked behind them like a guard who had not asked for the job but accepted it anyway. The students watched. Some cried. Some bowed their heads. Some looked away to give him less audience. That was the best thing they could have done. Sol looked at the sky. The real sky. Late afternoon blue with gold at the edges. He whispered, it's big. Zora's hand tightened around his. Yeah. Talia stood at the bottom of the steps with her bat. Sol looked at it. Are you a knight? Talia blinked. Zora coughed. Aya looked away, smiling. Talia straightened slowly. Yes. Kiki, 10 feet away, whispered, oh, she's never coming back from that. Sol nodded seriously. Good. Talia's face softened against her will. I'll take it. The alert about council jurisdiction arrived 12 minutes later. Of course. Ashbourne Supernatural Council requests temporary protective custody review for released bound minor/temporal entity, Solomon Baptiste. The quad groaned as one. Zora looked at the alert. Then at Sol. Then at the gathered students, staff, elders, lawyers, witches, vampires, wolves, veilborn, ghosts, workers, mothers, liars, witnesses, and exhausted committee chairs. Dre lifted his clipboard. Lila lifted her pen. Serafina opened a fresh folder. Celia cracked her knuckles in the most elegant way possible. Maxine blew out the red candle. Mama Odessa adjusted her sunglasses. Marva cross-planted her cane. Ms. Renee said, "They are not taking my soup, child." Sol looked up at Zora. "What's protective custody?" Zora smiled without humor. "Another form of trouble." He thought about that. Then held up his broken toy horse. "Do I have to go?" Aya answered first. "No." Nadine answered second. "No." Nasir answered third. "No." Zora crouched in front of him. "No," she said. "But this time, we don't just say no alone." Behind her, Saint Nocturne answered in voices. "Students. Staff. Family. Community. No." The chapel bell rang once. Not warning. Witness. And somewhere beneath them, the lantern heart glowed steady, while the council's newest petition began meeting the first thing Saint Nocturne's freed campus was learning how to build. Not a pact. Not a bridge. A wall with doors that opened only from the inside.